I wasn't supposed to be home that day. That's what makes it all sting even more, the way fate picks random hours to crush you. It was a Thursday. I'd finished a week-long project 2 days early and decided to surprise my wife, Natalie. We'd been married for 6 years. I thought we were happy, maybe not perfect, but stable. The kind of comfortable silence, love you earn after years of learning each other's rhythms. I remember stopping by the bakery near our house. Natalie loved their lemon tarts. I bought 2, imagining her laugh when I'd show up unannounced. The house was quiet when I parked. Too quiet. Her car was in the driveway, blinds half closed. I didn't think much of it, maybe she was napping. I unlocked the door softly, like I was stepping into a surprise party. But the surprise was mine. Halfway down the hall, I heard something. Faint, breathy. A sound I hadn't heard in months, my wife's moan. It froze me. It wasn't a movie kind of rage. It was the kind where your body forgets how to move. My mind wanted to rationalize, maybe she's watching something, maybe I misheard. Then I heard his voice. Low. Confident. Too close. Our neighbor, Chris. The guy who'd helped me fix the fence last summer. The guy who brought beer to my barbecue. The guy who waved every morning when I left for work. I didn't knock. I didn't yell. I just pushed the bedroom door open. It's strange what you remember in those moments. Not the nudity. Not the shock. Just the sound of the bed frame creaking. The way her hand clutched the sheet, like covering herself would undo it. Chris's face went pale. He didn't even try to speak. Natalie started crying before I could say a word. I left the tarts on the floor. I think one rolled under the dresser. Then I walked out. I drove for hours, without direction, until the highway blurred into nothing. My phone buzzed until the battery died, her name, over and over again. When I finally pulled over, I sat in silence, staring at the steering wheel. The woman I built my life around had just burned it down. And the man who did it lived 20 feet away. That night, I decided one thing. I wasn't going to yell, or beg, or forgive. I was going to make them regret it. I slept in the passenger seat of my car like a man waiting out a storm. Dawn came gray and close, the way it does in late October, and for a while I just watched the light crawl across the dashboard and tried to name the feeling in my chest. Betrayal had a shape, heavy, slow, concrete, but it also had a texture, the little, stupid details you replay until you can't tell which ones are memory and which ones are invention. I could have called someone. I could have called my sister, or my old friend Marco, and told them the whole thing and let them decide what I should do. Instead I did the thing I'd always done when my head was messy, I made a spreadsheet. It sounds insane, but that's what I am. Numbers and timelines are how I keep from losing myself. I pulled over at a coffee shop, opened my laptop, and started writing a log. Date, time, event, proof. June 12th, anniversary dinner, evidence, photos on social, July 3rd, Chris helped with fence, visited house at 11 p.m., August 21st, Natalie's unexplained nights out. Little entries. Big red lines drawn between them. I also told myself rules. No yelling. No confrontation. No blind forgiveness. No grand public spectacle. I wanted something quieter, cleaner. Revenge that didn't look like revenge. Something that would leave them stripped of what had mattered to them, not violent, not illegal, but final. Which meant I needed proof. Not just the image in my head of Chris's face when I opened that door. Not just the hot, humiliating flash of betrayal. I needed documents I could hold up in front of other people. I needed a case that wouldn't be discounted by tears and apologies. So I started with what was legal and straightforward. First, control the narrative of my life. I moved out that day. Not in some dramatic, court-televised way. I packed a duffel, an overnight bag, and took the spare key I'd always used and changed my passwords. I registered my mail to a P.O. box. I didn't tell Natalie. I left the house intact, but I closed the chapter for myself. People ask later why I didn't smash anything. Because smashing is what the person inside the building expects. Quiet is what unsettles them. Second, gather digital proof. I set up a new email under an alias and started monitoring local social activity where I knew they posted. I dug through old phone logs, things I'd never meant to keep but had, appointment confirmations, restaurant receipts tied to her credit card, timestamps on photos. I took screenshots of public posts. I dated and timestamped everything. I learned that routine makes liars sloppy, patterns reveal themselves the more you look. Third, a camera. Not in the bedroom, I'm not a fool. But a ring at the front door is legal, and it would catch faces, arrivals, and departures. I had one installed in under an hour. It was me being practical, the same quiet machinery I'd always used to track shipments and invoices. The first few nights, the footage was nothing, the mailman, Chris leaving for work, Natalie taking out the trash. But then at 2:13 a.m. on a Tuesday, the camera caught Chris's car pull into the driveway for 15 minutes. The same short, precise visits that had become a pattern. Timestamped. Audible. Indisputable. Fourth, call a professional. I told myself this was about efficiency, a private investigator could do things I couldn't. He'd been recommended by Marco, the guy specialized in domestic cases and, crucially, in gathering admissible evidence without crossing lines. I met him once, over an overpriced coffee, and explained I wanted documentation, not melodrama. He nodded and did not look surprised. People always think they're the first to be cheated on. He seemed bored and precise in a way I liked. The PI's methods were dull and thorough. He checked public records, tracked credit card charges at local restaurants, noted timestamps on grocery pickups, and, most helpful, he canvassed for witnesses in a way I could not. A delivery driver remembered dropping off flowers for Natalie at midnight 2 months ago. A contractor had seen Chris there at odd hours when Natalie said she was working late. The PI compiled statements and receipts into a fat file and shipped it to me with a tight, clinical summary, dates, corroborating witnesses, and a recommendation. Names, dates, receipts, he'd written in his cover note. Not salacious. Legally useful. When the file came, I lay on my couch and opened it like someone inspecting an autopsy. The photos were not pornographic. They were practical, a shadowed image of 2 people leaving the house, a receipt for a surprise dinner at a bistro 3 towns over, a photo of Chris's truck outside my house at 1:04 a.m. More than anything, the documents made the story of the betrayal feel inevitable. The timeline was a train that had been picking up speed while I slept. There was a part of me that wanted to hand the file to my boss and say, look at what she did. Another part wanted to post screenshots on the neighborhood Facebook group and watch the comments combust. But I had those rules. Quiet. Final. Clean. I also started to think about leverage. People cheat for reasons, sometimes the reasons are stupid, sometimes they're practical, sometimes they're medical. I found something odd in Chris's public business filings, a tax address that didn't match his current office, invoices that looked padded if you squinted. Nothing criminal on the surface, but the sort of thing that could make a bank hesitate, that could make a contractor's license come under scrutiny. Not everyone is ruined by shame, some things are undone by paper. But for that, I would need more than a PI. I needed patience. So I carried on living 2 lives. To the outside world I was calm and composed. I went to work, I smiled, I answered emails with the same quick professionalism. At night I refined the timeline, cross-checked timestamps, and read through the PI's notes until the ink in my eyes blurred. When friends asked if something was wrong, Marco, once, I said, I'm fine. Which is an honest lie. I was not fine. I was methodical. Then, 2 weeks into my new pattern, the thing I hadn't expected happened. I received a text message from an unknown number. There was no greeting, no preamble. Just one line, blunt and small-screened. We need to talk. See. My hands went cold. My rational mind constructed possibilities. Maybe he was going to apologize, maybe he'd been found out, maybe he wanted to end things cleanly. It felt like a trap. It felt like a rope thrown that could pull me back into the house I'd left. I did not reply. I stared at the phone until the screen dimmed. Then I opened the PI's file again and double-checked the dates. Chris's last payment through his company had a suspicious beneficiary. Natalie's last menstrual cycle, if you read into her health app, suggested something that could change everything. A new line appeared in my spreadsheet, unknown variable. Possible child. Possible motive. Possible leverage. I saved the document, closed the laptop, and for the first time since I opened that bedroom door, I felt the hair on my arms stand up. Someone wanted to talk. And whatever he had to say could change the plan. 2 weeks after the text, the house felt like a place I once owned but hadn't paid the mortgage on. I kept my distance, but I watched. Watching felt safer than feeling. It was a slower kind of revenge, not the snap of a fist, but the patience of a chess player who knows the endgame. Chris's messages never came again. Natalie's attempts to call me were all unanswered. She stood in the yard sometimes, shifting weight, watching the street like someone waiting for bad news to come home. People in our neighborhood began to look at me sideways when I walked past the mailbox. Neighborhood gossip runs faster than the truth. I learned how easy it is to be cast as the villain in a story you own. The PI was good. He moved without drama, the way a surgeon does. He did the boring, necessary things, traffic camera pulls, credit card traces, statements from baristas who remembered late-night coffee orders. He found a recurring number that paid for flights under Chris's company name, weekend trips to a city 2 states away. He found receipts from a boutique clinic on the other side of town, a clinic that handled delicate things. When he sent me the scanned invoices, there was a small notation, ultrasound, 12W. The letters looked indifferent on the page, but my stomach folded around them. I'd been clinging to the possibility I wanted, that this was something that could be fixed with a few calm conversations, maybe counseling, maybe an apology. The paperwork made it impossible to pretend there wasn't a future being planned that did not include me. The invoices said what her face that day in my bedroom had only hinted at. I did not want drama, but I wanted the truth. I wanted a single, cold fact I could hold up and say, this is real. Not feelings, not rumor, not the soft weeping that makes people forgive because it's easier. I wanted proof that would change the way other people saw this, and that would change the way I saw myself. So I asked the PI, how do you prove paternity before the baby arrives? There are ways. Not pretty, not dignified. The PI described them clinically, like he was offering lunchtime options. A cheek swab after the baby was born. A prenatal paternity test from fetal DNA, which required specific maternal blood work and a lab that would do it quietly. He warned me about legality, about how messy things could get. He also told me which labs skirted the edges and which didn't bother with skirts at all. I set rules again. No illegal break-ins. No blackmail. No posting in neighborhood threads. Keep the high ground. Keep the evidence clean. The PI nodded and wrote down the name of a lab that would work with samples and paperwork the way a notary works with signatures, legally defensible, sterile, incontrovertible. But there was a practical problem. I needed a sample from Natalie. A prenatal paternity test requires maternal blood to isolate fetal DNA. That meant getting her to the clinic under some pretense, or getting a sample without her knowing. I toyed with the idea, as men do in stories, of breaking in and taking a vial from a bathroom cabinet. It felt like petty crime and selfishness. Worse, it felt like the sort of thing I could get arrested for. So I did the sensible, cowardly thing instead. I waited. The PI did not wait. He found a cleaner route. A routine appointment, scheduled under Natalie's name, with a technician who'd been paid a few $100s to not ask questions. A woman with a tired smile who prided herself on discretion. The PI arranged for the tech to draw extra blood under the guise of a repeat test and courier it to the lab with a chain of custody form that made everything look official. I remember the courier photo the PI sent me, a small, anonymous envelope stamped with the lab's logo, sliding into a locker. It was obscene how dull that image made me feel. No thunderclap. No betrayal parading on the news. Just a file being delivered like an invoice. When the envelope arrived at my P.O. box, my hands shook. I opened it slowly. The lab report was clinical and short: maternal sample received, fetal fraction adequate, processing complete. There was a note about timelines and a separate sheet with instructions for lab secure call procedures. No results, not yet. Labs don't deliver life-altering news like a takeout order. They do it by protocol, by phone, with two people in a room to witness the admission. They read the numbers. They read the probabilities. They pronounced the certainty in percentages and confidence intervals. That afternoon I sat on a park bench and did nothing but watch my phone. My mind tried to outrun the paperwork and failed. I thought about the little rituals of our life, how Natalie kept the salt jar on the left side of the stove, how she folded the dry laundry twice. I thought about our first apartment, about the way she cheered when I fixed the sink. I thought about the sound of the bed when it moved, and about how ordinary things had become the scene of a crime. The call came at 6:04 p.m. I answered with my thumb and some muscle memory. A woman's voice, flat and apologetic, told me the sample processed. She read a phrase I'd rehearsed for sleep: "We can confirm paternity with 99.9% confidence if a comparison sample is provided." Then she recited the other option, the one that felt like a punch in the throat: "We can also determine if the fetus is genetically related to an externally provided second sample." I felt lightheaded. There was a pause while she waited for me to understand what she was saying. The lab wanted a second sample for comparison, a cheek swab from the alleged father. They could test any man's DNA against the fetal DNA in the maternal blood. The lab would not proceed without it. The PI had known this. That was why he'd included the suggestion in his initial note: secure a comparison sample. I had imagined 1,000 confrontations. None of them involved a cheek swab in a brown envelope. None of them involved the quiet humming of fluorescent lights and sterile plastic packaging. But there it was, the lever that would shift everything. I could go to Natalie and demand she tell me the truth. I could storm Chris's house and drag out his DNA under the street lamp. I could hand the lab a name and wait for the verdict. Or I could do something less theatrical and more absolute. I walked home that night, not to the house I'd left, but to a small motel near the highway. I opened my laptop, logged into an account I hadn't used in years, and started typing a message that I would never send unless I had to. It was short, and it was clean: "If you want the truth, give me a sample." I pinned the message as a draft and sat there until the neon buzz in the parking lot felt like ocean surf. I thought about justice as a thing beyond legalities, a moral arithmetic where receipts could balance the books of a life. I was exhausted, and yet there was a strange exhilaration in the clarity of what needed to be done. Then my phone buzzed. An unknown number. A single line. Bring it to my place. Midnight. See. My heart stopped in a way I can still feel, like a misfired engine. Chris wanted to meet. Not talk. Meet. The message was brittle, without apology, without art. It was a hand raised in the dark. I closed the laptop slowly, like someone shutting a coffin lid. Then I opened the glove compartment in my car and took out the duffel I'd left there when I moved out. I didn't know whether I was walking into a confession, a fight, or a setup. All I knew was that I was going back, and that whatever happened at midnight would decide the next step, whether I had proof that could free me, or evidence that would bury me deeper. The motel clock read 11:46 p.m. The town lights hummed. The papers in my duffel were neat. The lab had my number on file. I drove toward the houses, toward the dark window where once I'd seen them under the sheets. I thought about the smallness of things, how easy it is to fold a life into a few papers, how heavy those papers can be when they're right. I thought about the choice in front of me. Then I parked across the street and waited for midnight to come. Midnight smelled like cold metal and wet pavement. I parked under a street lamp that threw long, nervous shadows across the lawn. My duffel had the lab forms, the PI's binders, prints of invoices, and the little recorder I'd bought the week after I drove away. I told myself I only bought it as insurance, one more clean fact to back up the others, and allowed that small lie to keep me from thinking of what I'd become. Chris's porch light clicked on at 11:58. He stood there like the neighbor who borrowed a ladder, in a hoodie, hands shoved into his pockets. He looked older than the guy who fixed my fence. Guilt ages people fast in ways shame does not. He didn't invite me in. He met me on the stoop. No small talk. No apology. He had a cheek swab in a little paper envelope, like he'd been told to bring one. His hand trembled, which I had expected. What I hadn't expected was the way he looked at me, not with defiance, but exhaustion. Like a man who's already paid for his choices. I handed him a sterile tube, pretending indifference. Two men standing under a porch light taking DNA samples, it should have felt absurd. It felt inevitable. He swabbed his own cheek and sealed it. He asked, "Flat, is that it?" "Yeah," I said. My voice was a match struck in damp air. "That's it." He left it on the step between us and walked inside. When the door shut, I stood where I was and listened to the hollow of the house. I thought of how many hours of my life had been spent ignoring small smells and signals, deciding they were nothing. I folded my hands and imagined the paper trail I'd assembled, timestamps, receipts, witnesses, the clinic invoices. I imagined it like an argument in ink that could not be interrupted by tears. I took the duffel back to the car. I drove 3 blocks and stopped at a diner that never closed. I called the detective I'd been in touch with through the PI, a woman named Ramirez who had been professional enough that she didn't pretend to be shocked by anything. I told her, without flourish, that I had a comparison sample and a lab ready to test. I told her I had financial records suggesting fraud. She asked me to bring the documents. She said she'd meet me at the diner in 20. While I waited, I reread the PI's notes. There were invoices that didn't match services, payments routed through ghost companies, a contract that included a consulting fee with no name attached. Chris wasn't just a neighbor. He'd been running a small scheme, padding invoices through his handyman company, routing the extra to shell entities. The sums weren't enormous, but they were enough to build a cushion, to pay for late-night trips, to buy favor. More importantly, they were enough to get a prosecutor's attention if tied to a personal conspiracy. The PI had flagged a pattern of money moving in months where Chris's account showed deposits that didn't correspond to work. I thought about Natalie folding laundry in the kitchen, about the way she'd once kissed the back of my neck when I fixed the sink. I thought about the ledger-like clarity of prosecutors who like boxes checked and signatures in place. I thought about what justice might look like if it wasn't theatrical. Detective Ramirez arrived in a low-slung sedan. She wore a coat too thin for the night and an expression that suggested she'd been waiting for a clean line to connect. We did the things you do when you're trying not to look like vengeance seekers. We filed paperwork, we confirmed chain of custody, we arranged transport for the swabs and the fetal fraction sample. We did it in the fluorescent hush of the diner, away from the chrome coffee machines and the faces of people who thought midnight coffee was their biggest worry. Ramirez read the files once. She didn't smile. "This is tidy," she said. "You did it right?" I wanted to argue that I'd done nothing but let other people do the work. But the PI's name was on the first page, the lab's phone number on the second, and the invoices printed with dates and signatures. Tidy. Clinical. Useful. She called a unit. 2 patrol cars came slow and careful, lights off. That's the way they do it when they don't want to make a show of it, roll up quietly, ask for cooperation. I felt like the world was a hinge that had finally been oiled. We went to the house together. I stood on the sidewalk while Ramirez and 2 officers approached the porch. The door opened, and Natalie was there. She looked like someone who'd been living underwater and had finally found the surface. Her eyes were raw but not surprised, as if she'd been rehearsing this moment every night and had exhausted every possible face. Ramirez showed her a warrant. The officers asked for people's names in the house. Chris's voice, thin, told them he'd stay. Natalie's composure flickered and then steadied. She asked for a lawyer. The officers obliged. They read Miranda, the words feeling both ancient and precise. Chris answered in a voice that wanted to shrink. They found the receipts in the garage, in a shoebox where Chris kept things he didn't want to forget and didn't want me to find. They found a folder with bank transfers and emails between Chris and 2 shell entities. They found a copy of a lease with Natalie's name on it in another city, a lease she'd never told me about. The officers took pictures and logged each item like packing a briefcase for trial. I didn't want to watch them put handcuffs on him. I did anyway. The click of metal around wrists is a sound I will never forget. Chris's eyes met mine for a second, not pleading, not triumphant, just empty. He was carried away in a way that felt quieter than the betrayal, and louder. Ramirez turned to Natalie then, and in that blink I saw the calculation on my wife's face slide off like a mask. She crumpled. Not theatrical, real, small, human. She started to speak, haltingly, about mistakes, about loneliness, about things that felt like suffocation. She used words that asked for pity. The officers told her she could speak to detectives. They did not do that there on the porch. Later, in the station, with the lab confirming the paternity at 99.9%, and Chris's accounts frozen under subpoena, the pieces stacked themselves into a shape I recognized: conspiracy, fraud, and paternity. The lab's result answered the first question: the fetus was Chris's. The financial records answered the second: Chris had been padding invoices and diverting funds in a scheme that Natalie had known about and benefited from. The PI's witness statements showed that she had been meeting Chris under cover of work and that his trips lined up with the dates of clinic invoices. The wow, in the end, was not a single sentence of confession. It was the pile of ordinary documents that swallowed the story whole. Contracts, bank transfers, gas receipts, these things that had once been invisible became the reality. They were the things that would be filed in court, the things that would turn gossip into evidence and make people look at them not with sympathy but with facts. I chose not to press for the maximum. I had the right to burn everything down publicly, to write a post and let the world decide. Instead, I filed for divorce quietly. The house went on the market. I kept the P.O. box and the lemon tart receipt from that day as a stupid, small relic of the moment the world split open. Chris went to jail for a while. The fraud case moved slowly but certain as a glacier. Natalie faced charges related to conspiracy and benefited from restitution and counseling requirements. Neighbors whispered. People took sides. Life roared back into predictable channels. Months later, I stood in the same bakery and bought a lemon tart with cash. The woman behind the counter asked if I wanted a box. I took it to the small apartment I'd rented, the one with a single window that looked out at the street where strangers walked dogs and didn't know me. I ate half of the tart on the windowsill and watched my hands. I had wanted revenge that would make them suffer the way I had. Instead, the law did what it does, not for cruelty but for order. It turned the deceit into a process, and the process turned the deceit into consequences. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel whole. But the heavy thing in my chest had changed. It was lighter and, for the first time in months, kind of empty in a way that suggested room to move. The house I had built no longer belonged to me, but neither did the memory of that door I opened. That belonged to the past. I put the lemon tart in the fridge and, like every ordinary person who survived something extraordinary, I washed the plate, folded a towel the way my mother taught me, and went to bed early. Outside, 2 houses down, a porch light clicked on and off, the same steady rhythm it had before everything broke. Life goes on, not because it's kind, but because it must.